But in addition to all of this COVID, Michael, it's like we went from one thing to the other. We had COVID, and then it seemed like the world kind of was upended with a lot of tension. A lot of people really struggling with each other. There's a lot of pent-up emotion. There is racial tension as well. There's a lot of things going on. And so somebody actually said, how do we as Christians continue to act out our faith in a winsome manner while there's so much tension in our communities? Emotions are so high. It seems like, how in the world do we even begin to talk about God? Or is this even the right time to talk about God? Or is there a place for God in this tension? So if you have any thoughts you'd like to share with us on that.
Yeah, sure. And as you were talking, I was also just looking at the chat, and someone said, look, I'm from a Jewish background. I haven't heard of that festival. If you want to learn more, just Google Jonathan Sacks, S-A-C-K-S. He is the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. He has a brilliant mind, truly excellent. He has a little series on festivals, Jewish festivals. Have a look at that. You'll find it very interesting. It happens 10 days before Yom Kippur. Let me just come back to this issue that you mentioned too. It's so, it's around us. And the reason is that we are designed, because we've been created in God's image, to respond to failure of justice in the same way he does. So there is a very interesting part of the New Testament where God says, you do not hate what I hate. In other words, he's talking to his people. He's saying, look, you don't seem to care about what is wrong. And that's a very strong thing. So there are some things which call forth an action from us. And in Ephesians 4, we actually see this spoken to very, very clearly. 20 years ago, I think I would be asked questions a lot about God's wrath, and it would go something like this. How can you Christians who say your God is so loving and so kind and so forgiving, how can he be so wrathful? I can't possibly worship a God like that. It's completely contradictory. Now it almost feels like people are saying your God is too weak. He doesn't feel strongly enough about justice issues. How can I? Now, this is what's very, very, very interesting. In Ephesians 4, it says, when God sees that which is wrong, the response he has, the Greek word there, this active anger about injustice is there. That's how he feels about it. So if you want to know how God feels about injustice and sin, it's wrapped up in that word. Now, that may explain, if we're created in his image, why we feel that. But we're also told something very interesting in that passage too, that our wrath, human wrath, doesn't bring about righteousness. In other words, even we may initially feel that sting and that this is wrong, that outrage isn't actually going to be sufficient to positively take us through the moment. And you see the same message being given in the Old Testament too, where in the book of Hosea, twice it says, the second time actually, more powerfully than the second, Amos, you have turned justice into bitterness, so all your righteousness tastes like poison fruit. What that verse is saying there is, if the pursuit of justice itself becomes bitter, even if you get what is right, it may taste like poison to everyone else. In other words, you may have destroyed the very thing you sought to rescue. So I think you're absolutely right. We need a word now that not just simply casts vision and brings hope and motivates to action and actually changes what needs to happen. All of those things have to happen. It also has to deal with the bitterness that is being felt in a way that helps overcome it. In other words, if we pursue the right thing in the wrong way, that's what we'll be left with. So if our pursuit for justice in this world is motivated by bitterness, when we get justice, we're left with the bitterness. And even Hollywood classically has understood that. You watch any classic Hollywood revenge film, many of them, will be, westerns or gangster movies or someone, and someone will set on a path of revenge to kill all the people who killed those their loved ones. It gets to the end of the movie and they all finish the same way. Someone will turn to the hero, the main character, the protagonist of the story, and they'll say, was it enough? Have you got what you wanted? And they'll always say, it's not enough. Or I thought it would bring me peace, but it hasn't. In other words, I got the vengeance I thought I wanted that would bring me peace, and it hasn't. If the quest for justice is driven by bitterness, when you get justice, you're left with the bitterness and the emptiness. But if the quest for justice is driven by love and compassion, when you get justice, you're left with love and compassion. And that works out very differently into our society. So I think we can say at one level, we understand we can call out the injustice, which is undoubtedly there. We can understand that initial anger, the hot anger that then comes in response to it. But then the next question is, what is going to be the driving thing that can actually push through change and answer and deal with some of these things and leave something behind that's actually worth living for? So we're going to have to find a way through this difficulty. Otherwise, we'll be in danger of just simply tearing ourselves apart in the process, even though what we're pursuing is right.